It was just another Tuesday for Kira Johnson, a 24-year-old waitress working double shifts at a local diner. The familiar hum of the coffee machine, the clinking of silverware, and the soft murmur of customers filled the air. As always, Kira moved with purpose, her apron tied tightly around her waist, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. It was routine, really. Just another day of endless cups of coffee, greasy plates of food, and small talk with regulars who barely noticed her anymore. To the world, Kira was just another server in a bustling diner, her name barely remembered after she handed over the bill. But to Kira, this diner was much more than just a job. It was her stepping stone, the place where she could work hard and earn enough to chase her real dreams. Dreams that seemed impossible to most, dreams that she held close to her heart and whispered to herself in the quietest moments of the night. She wasn't born into wealth, and nothing had ever been handed to her. Kira knew what it meant to work for every penny. The bills piled up on her kitchen counter, but she didn't mind. She had learned to be resourceful, and every shift brought her a little closer to making her dreams a reality. One day, she hoped to leave this diner behind, to move somewhere big and bright and start a career that would make her proud. She wasn't sure exactly what that career would be yet, maybe writing, maybe starting her own business, but she was determined. But on this Tuesday, Kira wasn't thinking about her future. She was thinking about getting through the day. The morning shift had started early, the sun barely rising as she poured coffee for the early crowd of truckers and office workers. Her feet were sore from running back and forth between tables, but she didn't complain. She never complained. She had learned that complaining didn't change anything, so she just worked. That's what she did best. She worked, and she dreamed. The diner was small, a hole-in-the-wall kind of place, but it had a charm that kept customers coming back. The walls were covered with faded pictures of the town's history, and the jukebox played old tunes from decades past. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and where strangers felt like they'd been regulars for years. But it wasn't glamorous, not by any means. It was a place where people came to fill their stomachs and forget about their troubles, not a place to make big dreams come true. Kira's co-workers were friendly enough, but they had their own lives to worry about. They weren't interested in hearing about her big plans or the late-night writing sessions she squeezed in between shifts. They didn't understand her drive, her hunger for something more. Most of them had settled into the routine, accepting that this was all life had to offer. But not Kira. She couldn't stop dreaming. As the hours passed, the diner grew busier. A group of construction workers came in, laughing and joking as they sat at the counter, ordering eggs and bacon. An elderly couple slipped into a booth, the man gently holding the woman's hand as they smiled at each other. The regulars. Kira knew their orders by heart. She knew that Mr. Henderson liked his toast lightly buttered, that Mrs. Green always asked for extra sugar with her coffee, and that Mike, the truck driver, preferred his eggs scrambled with extra cheese. For Kira, these small details were what made the job worth it. It wasn't the tips or the long hours. It was the feeling of knowing that she was part of something, that she was making a difference in people's lives, even if it was just for a moment. The fleeting smiles, the quick exchanges of words, those were the things that made the work meaningful. By the time her second shift started, the sun had set, and the diner was filled with the dinner crowd. The smell of sizzling burgers and fries filled the air, and the sound of clattering dishes echoed in the kitchen. Kira moved quickly, taking orders, refilling drinks, and making small talk with customers. She had learned to stay in motion, to keep herself busy, because that was the only way to make the time pass. And then, just as the evening seemed to settle into its usual rhythm, something unexpected happened. A man walked in. At first, no one noticed him. He wasn't wearing anything that made him stand out, just a simple hoodie and jeans. But as he approached the counter, Kira saw the familiar face and her heart skipped a beat. It was LeBron James. Kiera had seen him on TV, of course, but she never imagined she would see him in her diner. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. She was used to seeing celebrities on the screen, but seeing one in person? That was a whole different world. But she quickly regained her composure. She had a job to do. She was a waitress, and it didn't matter who walked in. She treated every customer the same, whether they were famous or not. LeBron smiled when he saw her, his eyes friendly. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a warmth that instantly put her at ease. Kiera smiled back, trying to keep her cool, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest. "I'm doing great, thanks for asking," she replied, taking his order like she would any other customers. "A burger, fries, and a soda." He asked for everything to be simple, no special requests. Just like anyone else. It felt surreal, serving LeBron James like it was the most normal thing in the world. She kept her focus, not allowing herself to get distracted by the fact that she was serving one of the most famous athletes in the world. But when it came time to pay, something strange happened. LeBron swiped his card, and the machine beeped twice before showing an error message. He tried again, but the card still didn't go through. He shrugged, smiling sheepishly. "Looks like my card's acting up. Can you hold onto it for a second? I'll check it out." Kiera didn't hesitate. She smiled back and said, "No problem, I've got it covered." It was a small gesture, but it felt big to Kiera. She didn't have much money, but she couldn't let the world's greatest basketball player walk out of the diner without his meal. She paid for the meal out of her own pocket, slipping the cash into the register and making sure the receipt was cleared. LeBron was surprised but grateful. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "Thank you." Kiera just smiled, shrugging it off. "It's no big deal. Just enjoy your meal." As he finished his meal and left the diner, Kiera watched him go, a strange feeling of pride swelling in her chest. But she didn't know that her simple act of kindness would soon set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. At that moment, Kiera just went back to her routine, cleaning the table and getting ready for the next order. But little did she know, this ordinary day, this ordinary Tuesday, was about to become something much more than she could ever imagine. Kiera Johnson had always been a hard worker. She didn't mind the long hours. She didn't mind the tiredness in her legs at the end of each shift. To Kiera, the work was a necessary stepping stone away to get to something bigger, something better. She knew she didn't have much now, but she dreamed big. And every day she worked at the diner, she moved a little closer to those dreams. But that wasn't how Mr. Carter saw things. Mr. Carter was the manager of the diner. He wasn't a bad guy, but there was something about him that always rubbed Kiera the wrong way. He was old school. He believed in hard, physical labor and didn't have much time for anyone who dreamed of something more. To him, this diner was enough. To him, Kiera's dreams were just distractions, things that would never come true. "Kiera," he'd call out from behind the counter, his voice thick with judgment, "you need to stop spending all your time with your head in the clouds. If you focused on your job more and less on whatever nonsense you're reading about or writing, maybe you'd get somewhere." His words stung. They always did. But Kiera had learned to ignore him, at least on the outside. She bit her tongue when Mr. Carter made his little comments about her work ethic. She didn't have time to argue with him. She had too much to do. Her shift was long, the customers came and went, and she moved from one table to the next. But each time Mr. Carter spoke, the insult landed deep in her chest. His favorite line? "Maybe if you spent less time on those silly dreams, you'd actually be useful around here." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Dismissive. Like he was talking down to her. Kira had to remind herself that she couldn't let his words define her. She was better than that. Her co-workers, too, seemed to accept the way Mr. Carter ran things. They were content with the life they had. They came to the diner, served food, went home. Maybe some of them had bigger dreams once. Maybe they didn't. Kira wasn't sure. But it didn't matter. She couldn't let herself be like them. She couldn't let herself stay stuck in a place where dreams were only for the foolish. And so, Kira kept her head down. She worked harder than anyone else. She kept smiling at the rude customers who thought they could treat her like a servant. She cleaned up messes, took orders, filled drinks. She did it all, and she did it without complaining. But inside, she kept going back to that dream, the one where she was doing something bigger, something more meaningful. That evening, the diner was busier than usual. There was a buzz in the air, a kind of excitement that Kira hadn't felt in a while. She was running between tables, delivering orders, and listening to the chatter of the customers. The regulars were there, of course. Old man Henderson, who always took his coffee with exactly 2 sugars. Mrs. Green, the woman who never liked her toast too crispy. But tonight was different. There was an energy that Kira couldn't ignore. She glanced out the window, wondering if someone had brought in a birthday cake or if there was some kind of local event happening. But then the door swung open, and a tall man walked in. He was dressed casually, wearing a hoodie and jeans, but there was something about him that made the whole diner quiet down for a moment. Kira's eyes widened in recognition. It was LeBron James. She couldn't believe it. Of all places, why here? Why her diner? The basketball superstar had walked into her little diner, as if it was just another stop on his evening. There was no screaming fans or flashing cameras. No bodyguards or entourages. Just LeBron, walking in as if he was just another regular customer. Kira stood frozen for a moment. Her hands, which had been carrying plates of food, suddenly felt heavier. This wasn't a dream. It was real. LeBron James, one of the biggest athletes in the world, was sitting in her diner. But she quickly regained her composure. She couldn't let herself act starstruck. No, she had a job to do. She was a waitress. And she had been trained to treat everyone with the same respect, whether they were a famous basketball player or a local trucker passing through town. LeBron sat at the counter, and Kira walked over to him, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hi, how can I help you today?" she asked, her heart beating faster than she would have liked. He smiled warmly. "I'll have a burger, fries, and a soda, please. No special requests, just the usual." Kira nodded and went off to place his order, still feeling a sense of disbelief. This was the kind of moment she had only dreamed about. She wasn't starstruck, no, that wasn't it. But there was a feeling of awe that came with serving someone who had achieved everything she aspired to. She wondered if LeBron had ever been in her shoes working long shifts, grinding every day just to get by. Probably not. But still, she couldn't help but admire him. The night went on, and things seemed to settle into a routine again. The diner was still full, the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation filling the air. Kira worked, trying to keep herself focused. But her mind kept wandering back to LeBron. She couldn't help it. After all, how often did something like this happen? Then, as the evening wore on, things took an unexpected turn. LeBron finished his meal and reached for his wallet, pulling out a credit card. Kira waited patiently as he swiped it through the machine. But then, the machine made a strange beep. The card had been declined. He tried again, but the same thing happened. Kira could see the faintest hint of frustration on his face, but he didn't make a scene. Instead, he smiled a little, trying to play it off. "Looks like my card's acting up," he said, shrugging his shoulders. Can you hold on to it for a second? I'll check it out. Kiera could feel the eyes of the other customers on her. She knew they were all watching. The famous basketball player, unable to pay for his meal? It wasn't something you saw every day. She could feel the tension rising. But something inside Kiera clicked. Without thinking, she quietly grabbed the register, took out the cash, and paid for his meal herself. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was enough. She knew she didn't have much to spare, but in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. She didn't expect anything in return. She just wanted to help, to show kindness, even to someone who could buy anything in the world if he wanted to. When she handed him the receipt, she smiled and whispered, "It's on me." LeBron looked at her in surprise, his eyes softening. "Are you sure? You really don't have to do that." But Kiera just nodded. "It's no big deal," she said. "Just enjoy your meal." And with that, he thanked her and left the diner. Kiera watched him go, feeling a strange sense of pride. She had helped him, and in a way, she had done something small but meaningful. But Mr. Carter, who had been watching the entire exchange from behind the counter, wasn't impressed. As soon as LeBron walked out the door, Mr. Carter's voice cut through the noise of the diner like a knife. "Kiera, what the hell were you thinking?" he snapped. Kiera turned to face him, her stomach twisting. "What do you mean? You really think it's okay to just give away food like that?" Mr. Carter's voice was low, but filled with anger. "You think this is some kind of charity? You can't just pay for people's meals because you feel sorry for them. This is a business, Kiera. We don't do that kind of thing here." Kiera's face flushed, but she didn't say anything. She knew better than to argue with him. Mr. Carter shook his head. "You just don't get it, do you? This is why you'll never make it anywhere. Always acting like there's some bigger picture out there, always thinking you're special. You're not special. You're just a waitress. And you're gonna stay a waitress if you keep thinking this is how things work." Kiera felt her heart drop. His words stung, but she kept her head down, not letting him see how much they hurt. She had learned not to let him see how much his words affected her. But inside, a part of her was breaking. She had just done something kind, something she felt was right, and Mr. Carter had torn it all down. For Omini. Kiera's act of kindness should have been a simple gesture, something that quietly passed into memory. After all, she had paid for LeBron James' meal not because she expected anything in return, but simply because it felt right. A small act of compassion in a world that often lacked it. But that didn't happen. Instead, it became the catalyst for a series of events that Kiera could never have anticipated. The morning after the dinner rush, Kiera woke up early to prepare for another long shift. She didn't sleep well. Her mind was consumed with Mr. Carter's words, replaying them over and over. The sting of his insults hadn't faded. She thought about her dreams, about how she worked tirelessly to keep her head up despite the weight of his ridicule. Maybe it was her fault, she thought. Maybe she had been too hopeful. Too trusting. She tried to shake off the thoughts as she dressed, but they lingered like a shadow, haunting her as she walked to the diner. When she arrived, the air felt different, like something was about to shift. The usual hum of customers was missing. There was an odd stillness to the diner, like the calm before a storm. Kiera took a deep breath and went inside. Mr. Carter was already there, standing behind the counter, arms crossed, his face tight with frustration. He didn't look up as Kiera entered. He simply pointed to his office without a word. Kiera's heart sank. She knew what this was about. She had hoped, even prayed, that it wouldn't come to this. But deep down, she had known the truth. Mr. Carter had made it clear that he didn't appreciate her actions. And now, the consequences were coming. She walked slowly to his office, the heavy thud of her shoes echoing in the quiet diner. She didn't knock before entering. There was no point. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. Mr. Carter didn't greet her. He didn't even look up from the paperwork on his desk. He simply pushed a letter toward her. The plain white envelope, with no markings except for her name, looked so innocent. But Kira felt the weight of it. She knew what it meant. "Read it," Mr. Carter said in a cold, emotionless voice. Kira took the letter in her hands, unfolding it with trembling fingers. She didn't need to read the entire thing to know what it said. The words termination of employment burned into her mind, even before she finished the first line. "Your actions last night were completely inappropriate," Mr. Carter's voice broke through the fog in her mind. "This diner is a business. It's not a charity. We don't give away food, especially not to celebrities. You've embarrassed yourself, and you've embarrassed this place." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "I don't think you belong here anymore." Kira's chest tightened. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around her. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. She had expected something like this, but it still hurt. It stung in ways she hadn't prepared for. She stood there, staring at the letter in her hands. Her fingers were numb. The dreams she had worked so hard for, the ones that kept her going through every grueling shift, felt farther away than ever. She had been so stupid. Stupid to think that one act of kindness could matter. Stupid to think that the world could be different. Without saying another word, Kira turned and left the office. She didn't bother to stop for her apron or her belongings. She just walked out. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped outside. The fresh air hit her like a slap to the face. The world felt different now. The streets were the same, the cars passing by, the sun still rising. But everything felt distant. Like she was no longer part of it. Kira stood there for a long moment, staring at the diner through the large glass window. She felt hollow, like a piece of her had been taken. Her head was spinning. The termination letter in her hand felt like an anchor, dragging her down. But as she stood there, lost in thought, something strange happened. The sound of an engine revving broke through the fog of her mind. A car pulled up right in front of her. She glanced up and froze. It was a sleek black SUV, the kind you see in the movies. The tinted windows reflected the light, making it hard to see who was inside. The car came to a smooth stop. The door opened, and a figure stepped out. Kira blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It was LeBron James. He was standing right there in front of her. She wasn't sure how to react. Her mouth went dry. This couldn't be real. She had seen him just the night before in the diner, but this felt different. He wasn't just a celebrity now, he was standing in front of her like he had come here for a reason. "Kira," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "I need to talk to you." Kira's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't understand. What was he doing here? LeBron walked toward her, his presence larger than life. There was no mistaking it now, he had come for her. "I saw what you did last night," he said, his tone soft but firm. "You didn't have to do that. I could have paid for the meal myself. But you saw something. You did what felt right, not what was easy." He paused, his eyes studying her. "You think that's nothing?" "That's everything." Kira didn't know what to say. She felt a lump in her throat, emotions swirling inside her. "I know what it feels like to be overlooked, Kira," LeBron continued, his voice steady but filled with understanding. "I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be told that your dreams are too big. But I also know this, the world doesn't get to tell you who you are. You get to decide that." The words hit Kira like a wave. She had heard people say things like this before, but never from someone who had actually lived it. LeBron's words weren't just motivational, they were a lifeline. "I've been through my share of struggles," he said. "And I know that sometimes, the only way to prove everyone wrong is to keep going, even when they don't believe in you." Kiera's eyes welled up. She didn't know what to say. This wasn't how she expected the day to go. LeBron smiled at her, his eyes softening. "You've got something special, Kiera. I don't know what you're going to do next, but I know it's going to be big. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He turned and started to walk back to his SUV, but then paused. He looked back at her. "And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." With that, he got into the car and drove off, leaving Kiera standing there, still processing everything. She looked at the termination letter again, still clutching it in her hand. The world had just shifted. Kiera had no idea where it would take her, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe again. Something had changed. And it wasn't just the termination letter. It was her. She had been knocked down, humiliated, and rejected. But what Mr. Carter didn't realize was that Kiera's story was far from over. The moment she stepped out of that door, a chain of events had begun that no one could have predicted. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but Kiera was done being afraid of the obstacles. She was going to take the first step. She was going to fight for her dreams. This extended section can be developed further into even deeper insights and progressions as Kiera's journey continues. If you'd like to go further, we can keep expanding on how Kiera's choices start to ripple out, building to the climax. Days had passed since Kiera's encounter with LeBron James, but every time she closed her eyes, she couldn't help but relive the moment. His words, those simple, powerful words of encouragement, echoed in her mind like a song on repeat. It had felt surreal, like a dream. But here she was, sitting in her modest apartment, the weight of her life shifting beneath her, inch by inch. Kiera was used to disappointment. She had grown up with it, lived through it, and learned to bury it deep inside. She knew that life wasn't fair, but she also knew that she had to fight for what she wanted. What she didn't know, however, was that this fight was about to take a turn she could never have predicted. It was an ordinary Thursday morning. She was sipping on a cup of coffee, scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone, when something caught her eye: a video. It wasn't just any video. It was LeBron James, the man who had unknowingly shifted the course of her life in the matter of a few minutes. Her heart began to race as she tapped the video to play. LeBron was sitting in what looked like his personal office, surrounded by trophies and memorabilia. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice calm but filled with warmth. "Hey everyone, it's LeBron. I want to talk about someone incredible I met last week." Kiera's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she held the phone closer, every nerve in her body on high alert. She hadn't expected this. This was more than just a casual mention. This was something bigger. LeBron continued, his voice drawing her in, his sincerity almost tangible. "I don't usually do this, but there's someone who deserves recognition. I met Kiera Johnson at a diner just the other day. Now, I've met a lot of people in my life, but Kiera, she stands out." He paused, his eyes locking with the camera. "She didn't know me as LeBron James, the celebrity. She knew me as a person in need. She treated me like a human being, with kindness, without hesitation." Kiera's heart raced. She couldn't breathe. She had always believed that kindness was important, but to hear LeBron, of all people, speak so passionately about her? It felt like the ground was shifting beneath her. She didn't make a scene, didn't ask for anything in return. She just did what felt right. And that, right there, that's the kind of person we need to celebrate. The words washed over Kiera like a wave, each one more powerful than the last. She sat frozen, unable to move, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Was this real? Was this really happening to her? The video continued, but Kiera couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. She was in disbelief. Her phone buzzed in her hand, her social media notifications were going crazy. But she couldn't look at them. She was too overwhelmed by what LeBron had just said. People like Kiera remind us that kindness can change the world. So, I want to make sure the world knows her name, LeBron finished, his voice filled with a quiet but undeniable power. Kiera, thank you. You're more than just an inspiration, you're proof that we can all make a difference. The video ended, but Kiera remained frozen, staring at the screen. She could hardly believe it. Had LeBron really just said all that? Did he really just use his platform to elevate her story? It felt like a dream. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of it. But there was no mistaking it, LeBron James had just put her on the map. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a flood of notifications. The comments, the shares, the likes, it was all happening so fast. Kiera couldn't keep up. Her inbox was exploding. Job offers. Scholarship opportunities. Donations from strangers who had been moved by her story. It was overwhelming. For a moment, she thought she might pass out from the sheer weight of it all. But there was something else. A sense of hope that had been missing from her life for so long was beginning to creep in, slowly but surely. It was as if the door she had been knocking on for years had finally opened, and now, everything was changing. Just when Kiera thought she couldn't take it all in, there was a knock at her door. She almost ignored it, thinking it was just another package or maybe a neighbor asking for a favor. But something about it felt different. It was like the world had already shifted, and this was just another step in the new direction. Kiera stood up and walked to the door, her legs unsteady as she opened it. And there, standing on the other side, was none other than LeBron James himself. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. Not in a million years. LeBron smiled at her, holding something in his hand, an envelope. He was dressed casually, but there was an unmistakable aura of power about him, something that made the world around him seem to pause. "Hey Kiera," he said, his voice warm and familiar, as if they were old friends. "I told you I'd be back." Kiera could hardly believe it. "LeBron," she whispered, her voice shaky. What are you doing here?" "I'm here because I promised you that I'd be back," he said, a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. "And because your story is just beginning." He handed her the envelope, his smile never wavering. "This is for you," he said. Kiera took the envelope with trembling hands, unsure of what was inside. She opened it slowly, carefully, almost afraid of what she might find. And as she pulled out the contents, her eyes widened. Inside was a letter, but it wasn't just any letter. It was an official contract, one from a major charity organization. The letter was an offer to become an ambassador for their cause, a role that would change her life. The charity wanted Kiera to travel the world, sharing her story of kindness and compassion. They wanted her to represent everything she stood for, everything she had always believed in. The offer was more than just a job, it was an opportunity to make an impact on a global scale. Kiera's hands shook as she held the letter, unable to process what she was seeing. This was more than she could have ever dreamed of. This was everything she had hoped for and more. But how? How had this all come about? LeBron was watching her, his smile soft and knowing. "You've got a gift, Kiera. You've got something that people need to see. You've inspired so many with your actions, and now it's time for you to take that inspiration to the next level." Kiera looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. "But I don't know if I can do this. I'm just a waitress." LeBron shook his head gently. "You're so much more than that. Don't sell yourself short. You're here for a reason. And now, it's time to take that next step." Kiera's world had been flipped upside down. From the humiliation of being fired to the unexpected kindness of a celebrity, and now this. She couldn't believe it. She had always dreamed of making a difference, of being something more than the girl behind the counter. But now, the world was finally starting to see her. With tears in her eyes, Kiera smiled. "I'll do it," she said, her voice full of resolve. "I'll take the leap." LeBron's smile grew wider. "I knew you would." As he turned to leave, he paused for a moment, looking back at her. "This is just the beginning, Kiera. The world is waiting for you." And with that, he walked away, leaving Kiera standing in the doorway, the letter in her hands and her heart full of hope. The future was hers now, and nothing was going to hold her back. This detailed section sets the stage for Kiera's big break, her life transforming in unexpected ways. We can build upon this narrative further to explore how she navigates this new chapter, leading into the resolution and final steps of her journey. The days following LeBron's visit felt like a whirlwind. Everything was happening so fast that Kiera could hardly keep up. Yet, each moment felt like it was meant to be, as if the universe had finally aligned for her. The letter in her hands was proof of that alignment, proof that her dreams were no longer just dreams. She sat in her small, modest apartment, staring at the letter that had changed everything. The invitation was clear: LeBron's foundation had selected her to join a prestigious leadership program. The program would not only pay for all of her educational expenses but also provide mentorship from some of the most influential leaders in the country. It was the kind of opportunity most people could only dream of. And here she was, standing at the threshold of it all. "I don't even know where to start," Kiera whispered to herself, her hands trembling as she reread the words. It felt unreal. This wasn't the life she had imagined, the one she had grown accustomed to. This was a completely new chapter, one that was full of promise and potential. For so long, she had fought for something better, and now it was within her grasp. The phone buzzed on the table in front of her. It was a message from her mother, a simple text: "I'm so proud of you, Kiera." It made Kiera smile. Her mother had always been there for her, even when things seemed impossible. She had never let Kiera give up, even when it seemed like the world was stacked against her. And now, everything was changing. Kiera had spent so many years feeling invisible. The job at the diner had been her lifeline, her way of making ends meet. But it had also been a constant reminder of the limitations placed on her. The mistreatment, the lack of respect, it had all worn her down. But now, with this letter in hand, she knew she was finally free. Free from the constraints of the diner. Free from the judgment of people like Mr. Carter. Free to live the life she had always wanted. Meanwhile, across town, things were taking a very different turn. The news of Kiera's kindness had spread far beyond the walls of the diner. People were moved by her selfless act, but it wasn't just the kindness that had captured the public's attention, it was the way she had been treated afterward. Mr. Carter's cruelty had not gone unnoticed, and word had spread quickly. Customers who had frequented the diner now found themselves disgusted by the way Kiera had been fired. They didn't want to support a business that treated people that way. The boycott began slowly at first, but soon it gained momentum. Social media exploded with messages of support for Kiera, and people everywhere were calling for justice. The calls for accountability didn't stop there. LeBron's video had amplified everything. It wasn't just about a simple act of kindness anymore, it was about the power of kindness and the importance of standing up for what's right. As the boycott continued, the diner's sales plummeted. What had once been a busy, bustling establishment became eerily quiet. Customers who had once filled the booths now found themselves searching for new places to eat, places that would treat them with respect. The impact was undeniable. Even the local media picked up the story. News outlets ran segments about the fallout from Kiera's firing, with interviews from people who had witnessed the situation firsthand. The public sentiment was clear: Kira had been wronged, and the world was demanding justice. But what would justice look like for her? For Mr. Carter, it was only a matter of time before the consequences of his actions caught up with him. The restaurant's decline in business was only the beginning. As the negative press continued to grow, so did the pressure on the diner's owners. They could no longer ignore the damage that had been done. The tipping point came when a group of employees, who had watched the entire situation unfold, came forward with their own stories of mistreatment and poor working conditions. These workers were brave enough to speak out, and soon, the story of Mr. Carter's toxic management became a focal point for all who had been wronged by him. The final blow came when the owners of the diner announced that they were closing its doors for good. The damage was irreversible, and the public outcry was too much to ignore. For Mr. Carter, it was a humiliating downfall. The very place where he had once held power, the diner he had controlled with an iron fist, was now a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. His name, once associated with the diner's success, was now synonymous with failure. And while the public's attention turned to Kira, offering her the praise and recognition she deserved, Mr. Carter's reputation lay in ruins. Back at her apartment, Kira couldn't have felt more different. She was no longer the waitress who had been humiliated and cast aside. She was a woman with a future, with a purpose, and with the kind of support she had never known before. As she packed her bags to prepare for her first day in the leadership program, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the foundation. They had arranged for her to meet with some of the most influential leaders in the industry, people who would guide her as she took her next steps toward greatness. But the biggest change of all wasn't the job offers or the mentorship opportunities, it was the way people now looked at her. Kira was no longer invisible. People saw her for who she truly was, a woman of character, of strength, and of unwavering belief in the power of kindness. It wasn't just LeBron who believed in her now, it was the world. And when the day came for her to walk through the doors of the leadership program, she did so with her head held high, knowing that this was just the beginning of her journey. She wasn't bound by the past anymore. She wasn't just the waitress. She was Kira Johnson, a woman who had overcome every obstacle life had thrown at her, and now, the world was waiting for her. Back in the quiet of her apartment, as she prepared for the next chapter, Kira couldn't help but think back to that moment when LeBron had first walked into the diner. It had all started there. A simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that no one, least of all Kira, could have predicted. She had given without expecting anything in return. And in return, the universe had given her the chance to fulfill her wildest dreams. As for Mr. Carter, his downfall was complete. The lessons from his own cruelty had become clear. In the end, Kira's story wasn't just about her rise, it was about the power of justice, the power of kindness, and the undeniable truth that doing the right thing always leads to the best outcome. This segment of the Resolution and Justice Served section shows the consequences of both Kira's and Mr. Carter's actions. If you want, we can continue expanding it to focus more deeply on Kira's internal growth, public reception, and even some more detailed scenes about Mr. Carter's fall. Kira stood at the window of her new apartment, looking out at the city that had once seemed so vast and overwhelming. Now, it felt different. The lights twinkled in the distance, each one representing another person, another story, another opportunity. Kira had come so far from the girl who had once struggled to make ends meet, and as she reflected on her journey, she felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. When she had first started working at the diner, it had felt like just another job, a means to an end. She had never imagined that it would be the place where her life would change forever. But it was there, in that humble diner, that she had learned some of the most important lessons of her life. It was there that she had found her strength, her compassion, and her resolve. It was there that she had discovered just how powerful a simple act of kindness could be. Kira had been knocked down so many times. By the unfair treatment of others, by her own self-doubt, by the constant reminder that life wasn't always fair. She had been told to dream small, to settle for less, to accept the hand she had been dealt. But Kira knew deep down that she was meant for more. She had never been one to back down, no matter how hard things got. And so, she had kept going. Even when it seemed like the world was against her, even when the obstacles felt insurmountable, Kira had kept pushing forward. She had refused to give up on her dreams, no matter how many times they had been mocked or dismissed. Her faith in herself had never wavered, and in the end, it had paid off. Kira's story was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest actions can have the biggest impact. When she had helped LeBron that day at the diner, she hadn't known that it would change her life. She hadn't known that one simple act of kindness could set off a chain of events that would lead to everything she had ever dreamed of. But that's how life works, isn't it? You never know who's watching or what tomorrow might bring. The world can be a tough place. It can be full of challenges, disappointments, and people who will try to hold you back. But Kira had learned that you don't have to let those challenges define you. You don't have to let the opinions of others dictate your worth. Sometimes, you have to rise with grace. You have to stand tall, even when the odds are stacked against you. Kira had faced rejection, ridicule, and heartache, but she had never let those things break her. Instead, she had used them to fuel her determination, to push herself harder, to prove that she was more than the limitations others tried to place on her. She had learned that kindness, integrity, and resilience were the qualities that truly mattered, and those were the qualities that would carry her through whatever came next. And now, as she looked out over the city, Kira knew that her journey was far from over. She had come so far, but there was still so much more to do, so much more to achieve. There would be challenges ahead, there would be setbacks, but she was ready. She had learned how to rise above the noise, how to stay true to herself, and how to keep moving forward, no matter what. Kira's story was one of transformation. From the girl who had been overlooked and underestimated to the woman who now had the world at her feet. It was a reminder that no matter where you start, no matter how many times you fall, there is always a chance to rise again. You are never defined by your circumstances. You are defined by your ability to overcome them. And as she moved forward, Kira knew that she would never forget the lessons she had learned along the way. She would never forget the kindness that had been shown to her, the people who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. She would never forget the strength that had come from the moments of doubt, and how it had shaped her into the person she had become. Kira's story wasn't just her own. It was the story of anyone who has ever faced adversity, anyone who has ever been told they weren't enough, anyone who has ever struggled to find their place in the world. It was a story for anyone who has ever dared to dream. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Kira took a deep breath. She knew that she had earned this moment. She had fought for it. And now, she was ready for whatever came next. Her journey was far from over. It was only just beginning.